written for video games and for comic books at DC, Marvel, Eclipse, which I can remember even if you don't, Image, IDW. He's also worked on the marketing side of the business. And I wanted to ask him a little about that. And in 2008, drawing on this expertise, he wrote a book called No Guts, No Glory, How to Market Yourself in Comics. And I just overheard you talking to the fellow from the show, but I was going to make you repeat yourself a little bit. You started as what we used to call a letter hack. And for people who don't remember the days when comics had letters pages, usually in the back, what was a letter hack and how did it get you started?
That was someone who wrote to, back then, like John just said, each comic book had a letter column, and fans would write in. In fact, that was my actual first experience with fandom in general, because I found out, there's people, I was like a serial killer that went, there's other people like me. I felt kind of normal because they were writing into comics with the same thoughts that I had, and that got me to where, especially as I got a little older, this is before internet. This was the way to contact. If I was going to work in comics, to me, this was the route that I saw. And so what I would do is each week when I would buy comics, I would make myself, after I read each one, not after I read all of them, but each one, I would go and write a letter of comment to the editor and assistant editor. Very important that you add the assistant editor, because even then I knew the assistant editor is going to be an editor one day, and they're always going to want to bring to their editor and the company, hey, look what I found for you, look what I discovered for you. So I said, I want to be that person that they discover. That would be a good end. I would be helping them and me at the same time. So it broke down into a feeling that I got from Stan Lee when I was a kid. I mean, DC Comics was, to me, even then, it was written by old men. That's the way I felt it was. It was written by older guys like my parents that, didn't know anything. Not because of story content so much as how they spoke to me. But Marvel Comics, on the other hand, it was like they opened the clubhouse door and said, come on in, I'm Stan Lee, this is Jack, this is Don Heck, we were invited. And I didn't know at that time that Stan and them were just as old as the guys at DC. But Stan and them were a little more, in the early 60s, a little more desperate than DC Comics was. So, it was like, throw it against the wall, see what happens. So Stan was selling Stan Lee. If you like Stan, then you're going to like Marvel Comics. There'll be a chance you'll buy a Marvel comic if you like Stan Lee. And Don Heck, who was an artist and one of my favorite of all times, he and I got to be friends later in his life. And he would tell me great anecdotes about working at Marvel and of other places. But one of the stories was that, Stan's got, he's always wanting us to come into the office back then and do interviews with some college kid that's in there with a newspaper, or, he wants us to make us a little record. We're trying to get the book out on time. If I do that, I'm going to miss deadlines. So a lot of them, unless they were just in the office, didn't do it. And Don said, he goes, I regret that later. He goes, Stan knew what he was doing. And, Stan built a name for himself, which he did. And so when I was in the 6th grade, Mom and Dad, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, I want to call Stan Lee. And they're going, who's Stan Lee? And, it's a comic book guy, or whatever. You want a bike? No. You want a gun? No. I want to call Stan Lee. So they, long distance calls were a big deal back then. You just didn't up and do them. So they looked it up. They gave it to me. I called and got Flo Steinberg, who was Stan's right-hand person. And, there's basically back then there were 3-4 people in the office. She was extremely nice to me, and I didn't know then she was fresh out of college, so she wasn't probably much older than me. But she was extremely nice to me. She talked to me, and I said, "Well, it's my birthday, and I've called. I want to talk to Stan Lee." And she goes, "Well, Stan's in the next room writing the new issue of what was your favorite?" And I said, "Daredevil." Well, he's in there writing the new issue of Daredevil, and if, he comes out here, he's going to be late, and then you won't get your book. And I said, I don't want to, do that. And she goes, well, she started asking me, what about, what do you do in school? What do you like? What's your favorite comic? And she spent and this is a long distance call, she spent a good 20 minutes talking to him.
Oh.
And she got my name, my address. She goes, let me get your name and address and all that. She goes, that way we'll know you called. Just I said, okay, that sounded like something an adult would ask. So I did and hung up, and I was not happy that I didn't get to talk to Stan, but she was so nice. I was satisfied. I was, this is good. I talked to somebody at Marvel Comics. Wow, I told all my friends at school. Well, 2 weeks later, I get this package, and on it said Marvel Comics Group at the top. I went, oh, I ripped that thing. Stan had sent a letter, a handwritten letter. He had sent comic books, and he had signed a couple of them, and a little note, and on Marvel stationery, which they were doing at the time. That ended up being the best birthday gift I'd ever gotten in my life. And as I got older and was wanting to bust into comics, and this was in the 80s, early 80s, I kept that, what Stan did and what he meant to me as far as he sold himself. If I were going to get into this, what would Stan do? I mean, it was almost one of those cases. So when I wrote these letters of comment, I signed my full name, which is Stephen Scott Beau Smith, because that set me apart from Jim Edwards, who sent a letter in, or Bobby Tompkins. I had 4 names. That was different. And I tried to make the letters as constructive criticism and humorous too, if I could. And I would send them each time I read a comic. Well, after a while, the editors, I went to Todd will remember this. It was ChicagoCon, used to be held in Rosemont, Illinois. And I went to that, and I met a couple editors then at DC Comics, and I introduced myself. And I wasn't a kid then. I was 30 at least. And they were going, "Oh, you're the guy with 4 names." Bingo. That was all the little bit of crack in the door I needed. And at that same convention, I was going around to different artists' table and talking to people, and I met Tim Truman, who was doing. He had just left doing Star Slayer, and he was doing a new book at Eclipse Comics called Scout. And he and I were talking. He goes, "You kind of talk like I do. Where are you from?" And I said, "Huntington, West Virginia." I said, "Wow, where are you from?" He goes, "Dunbar area, Dixie, West Virginia." He started. So we had that connection. We started talking about all the mutual stuff of West Virginia. Needless to say, I'm not going to drag you on, but we built up a relationship right then. We started corresponding to each other. And, I was working at an audio video store at the time. Tim is an accomplished musician. He's done artwork for Santana and Grateful Dead and stuff for album covers. So we started, we had mutual love for music and comic books, and we just started in films as well. We started talking, built up a relationship. He introduced me to another lifelong and friend of mine and a sometime co-writer who I was never worthy of, Chuck Dixon. And from Chuck, met Tom Lyle, Gary Quapitz, Flynn Henry, John K. Snyder, all these guys that ended up being core artists and writers at Eclipse Comics. Well, Dean Mulaney was the publisher of Eclipse Comics. And Tim called me up one time. He goes, you do that sales and marketing thing. He goes, comics. He goes, Eclipse needs a sales manager. And I said, well, they're in Greenville, California. I'm not moving, way out there. He goes, nah, I think they can, we got telephones. They can do it long distance. That was the technology then, telephones. So he goes, we're doing the American Bookseller Association in Washington, D.C. He goes, if Dean calls you, you want to talk to him? I said, yeah, sure. So he called me up and basically said, I'll pay for your plane ticket dinner. I'd like to meet you. Tim and Chuck will be there as well because we were selling books to the bookseller. So I went there. Ended up there was this connections weren't really good, and I didn't have a pass to get in. Dean neglected to give a pass for me to get in. So I told them I was a famous author, that I would publish for Eclipse Comics. I was there to sign books. I needed to get in. And through, again, a little finagling, a little fibbing, which is what I do for a living, I got in, and I had an escort up to the Eclipse booth. And they apologized. We're sorry, he was delayed down there. And Dean was, this is the first time, who is this? Oh, this is Beau Smith. So we got to, meet each other through that. And right there, he goes, okay. He goes, that proves to me, he goes, that you can do this job. He goes, I got one more thing. He gave me an advance copy of a book they were wanting to do. He goes, that's our main distributor of their Diamond Distribution. He goes, the guy that works there used to work for a rival publisher. He goes, he hates me. They won't push our books because he hates me because I bought his publishing company after they went under. He goes, can you get them to push this book? Can you get them to be our friend? So I went over there, met with Steve Jeppe, who was the head of it, the party he spoke of, and a couple others. And after an hour or so, I came back and I said, well, they're going to run a special place in this in their catalog for it. Like, great. You know, he was, oh, this is wonderful. Then the next Dean mistake of not having a tag for me to get in, well, he goes, I forgot to book your room. So that night, because Chuck and Tim were rooming together, Dean and I, who'd never met, and we're at opposite ends of the cultural spectrum, let's just put it that way, you know. And
He was from California, you say?
yes, yes. He goes, you can room with me. Well, I did, and there was one bed. So I can say I got my Eclipse job by sleeping with Dean Mulaney. I mean, it's odd, but he and I still laugh because to this day I still work for Dean doing marketing for the Library of American Comics through IDW Publishing. So it's been a wonderful 30-year career, you know, lifelong friend. But for your good, straight-to-the-point question, that's my long way around the barn. And as you can see, you guys know I got diarrhea of the mouth. Give him an opening, he won't shut up. But that's how I got into it. And with those editors, they would start to send me advanced copies, Xeroxes, of comic books. We're going to do this series, and we want a letter column in it in advance. Could you write a letter? I said, sure, yeah, I'd be glad to. After a while of doing that and keeping up these relationships with these guys, you know, correspondence, you ever thought about writing comics? And I said, yeah, a lot. Well, won't you send us a pitch on this because we're going to need this? Well, it ends up at Eclipse that got me a job. It didn't at DC at that point because a lot of editors were switching around, but that was the relationship and how I built it before internet, before fax. We had FedEx and phone back then, and that was pretty much it. And I used the mail like a rented government mule. I mean, I used it. I supported them, and to this day still do, just out of that. But that's how I got into comics. And to segue into something else for now, because technology has changed so much, I do talks at universities and schools and libraries and anywhere else, where they'll let me come in and talk. With technology today, you'd think it would be a lot easier, but everyone's using it. What you've still got to do is you've got to market yourself first. You are the product. Your creativity is next. And I know a lot of creative people are, no, I'm an artiste. This is for the art. And I'm not, you know, that's the way they are, and I understand that. But you have to today. If you're unless you are Frank Frazetta reborn, you have to. You've got to be able to make yourself likable. You've got to make yourself for these people. If you can sell yourself to them and sell your stories to them, you can sell your stories. They can sell your stories to readers and customers. You have to find some, even if you're quirky, somebody will go, oh, I'm kind of quirky. I was picked last on the volleyball team, this, and, you know. Well, then use that as your strength. You know, be as creative marketing yourself as you are with the stories you do. I got into the business late. I mean, I was in my 30s. Most people got in. Mike Grell, a longtime friend of mine he's across from me. You know, he was doing comics. He's not much older than me, but he was doing them in like 69, 70. And I didn't get in until 86, so I was in my 30s, and that's late, and that's another strike against you. And I was from a small town in West Virginia. You know, I didn't live in Los Angeles, and I didn't live in New York. So, you know, it was, if a nitwit like me can do it and keep doing it for 30 years, anybody with real talent can do it for a lot longer and probably be a lot more successful.
Well, that segues into the next question I was going to ask. Apart from writing comics, you worked as marketing, and tell me if I'm wrong, in IDW, Image, and Todd McFarlane Productions?
Yeah, and Eclipse Comics.
And Eclipse.
Yep.
So you'd worked all those years, not worked, you were a reader for years.
Sure.
And you'd been a writer for a number of years, too. So in theory, you understood the comic book industry frontwards and backwards. What did you not understand about it, it turned out, once you started to spend time in marketing and the actual business of getting these things into people's hands? You walk into a comic shop, it's packed with comics, it's packed with toys. I don't know how anybody tries to get our attention anymore. What did you learn about how to promote these items that we all love that you took away from you from these jobs?
What probably surprised me the best, when I got into the industry, there were 26 distributors that distributed comics. When I was at Image, and each one of these had a minimum sometimes of 5 warehouses apiece. So, and as part of marketing, I would go to these individual warehouses, and what I would do is I said, I've got to be one step ahead. What's my rival? The guy that's got my job at Marvel, at DC, at Dark Horse, Kamiko, whoever was in business, what are they not doing? So I found out they were not going to the individual warehouses. So I started getting in the truck and driving to the individual warehouses where I do presentations of here's what we've got the next 6 months at Eclipse Comics that we've got coming out. And that helped out a whole lot because I built up relationships with the guys that were talking to the retailers when they came in, that were helping them load their books. And it works in the fact that, hey, Beau Smith from Eclipse was just in here last week. He said this book's on the order form right now, and that's when I would time it. It was when the previews and the other catalogs would come out. It says this is going to be real good. Oh yeah, they got Mike Grell doing 007 or whatever the case may be. And just that little bit coming from their voice to them, which is word of mouth is always the best advertising, which the internet will tell you, worked. I mean, that was a little plus. And as technology changed, with video cassettes and everyone had their camera, I started doing video presentations, and yes, part of it was me sitting at a desk and here's what we've got coming out. So what we added was I was doing a backup strip at Eclipse called Beau LeDuc's Tips for Real Men, and Beau was an exaggerated version of myself, John Wayne, and my dad. And I mean, he was just, Scout, you're wearing a skirt, talking about his tunic. You look like a sissy. He was just, this kind of guy, because testosterone was the thing in the 80s. It wasn't politically incorrect at that point. So what I did is I got with some friends of mine in town, and none of us were actors or anything, but they had done television production. We got the camera, and we did these adventures of Beau LeDuc, which related to Eclipse, and they were put in between the sales things. So they got Beau LeDuc fighting a guy in a gorilla suit. They got Beau LeDuc fighting an Elvis lookalike. All these different little segments. Well, those they would play. We'd send them out to all the distribution warehouses, as well as Diamond Capital, whoever's in business. Those things caught on because if nothing else, Beau and his friends, they're insane. This is crazy. But it made all of them watch the presentations just to see what idiocy, would transpire. So that was always a point of what can I do? Probably the hardest part, especially late 80s, early 90s, was the lack of diversity in comics because, it was guys my age at that time that were the only ones buying comics. There weren't a lot of kids. There weren't any female women in it at all. And I'm just looking at it from a business standpoint. I knew that's too much of a small market. That's too much of a niche market because these guys are going to eventually get jobs, have families, have kids, and what's going to be cut out? What's going to be cut out is your spending of luxury entertainment money. Because, I was going through this at the same time. I didn't have as much money to spend on comic books, and they were $1.99 then. I thought that was outrageous, but I had to cut back, and I knew life is going to make these cuts for them. So we needed kids, we needed women, we needed all these people that weren't there. And that was a tough road to hoe because, to be honest with you, still couldn't find a way at that point because fellow creators and even more so publishers, I want to stick with what I got. I just want to go with what's familiar. No, we can't. Girl comics won't sell. Girl comics to them was romance comics, where you really, there were a few, Ms. Tree was one, and a few others that had strong female characters without being, so blatant. It's just, this is something that can work. That was where we got the most resistance, and that was the most frustrating, and that really didn't change much. I didn't get heard until I worked for IDW in 2000, and that was with people I'd worked with at Eclipse who were not upper management, but like me, they were just right there in the middle. Where they said, yeah, let's try some of this stuff. Let's hit this. And Ted Adams, who's the CEO of IDW, he was our distribution manager. We hired him out of college in 1990 at Eclipse. I knew the first day I took him to lunch, we were out in California. Dean says, take the kid to lunch, see what you think. I came back, I said, we're all going to be working for him one day. I said, this is absolutely the smartest guy I've ever met. And here it is, 30-some years later. Library of American Comics is done through IDW Publishing. I work through them. That's what Ted is the CEO of that, IDW Entertainment and all the other branches of it. I would like to say I was smart enough, but I was just lucky enough to see that in Ted 30 years ago. I mean, the guy, I'm not here just to have him run for president, but he really, when it comes to business and our industry as comics, he's brilliant. He really, and he's straightforward. I mean, there's been times where I've pitched, I hear I'm one of his best friends, and I've pitched stuff, and he just, Beau, this isn't right for us right now, and he will explain it, but he's always honest, and that, you don't want a time waster. You don't want somebody that's going to slap you on the back. You don't want anybody that's going to string you along. You don't want to waste their time, especially you don't want to waste your own. And honesty is huge. It's huge in that. And I've tried to do that a little more as I've gotten older. It's tough because, you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, especially someone but that's been a big plus. With their books, they have a budget, and they stick to that budget. But that budget allows them, because a lot of publishers would extend theirs and not be able to pay the creators. And then it gets, I remember it when I was with Eclipse. I was at San Diego Con. I came up the elevator, and Neil Gaiman, who was doing Miracle Man for us at that time, great guy, super gentleman, and always has been. He and I are on the elevator, and I knew my bosses, Eclipse and Counting, owed him money for issues that weren't paid. They just didn't have it. This was towards the end when they went out of business, a lot of things. And he goes, just as nice, and I can't imitate him. Oh, so good to see you. I know it's not your fault, but Eclipse still owes me a great deal of money, and I would like to get that, taken care of before we have to bring in lawyers and all that. I mean, he was just as sweet and nice as could be. Of course, I took that back to our guy that was head of accounting and told him and stuff. And, eventually they got some of it straightened out, some of it not. But he was a true gentleman. Alan Moore was the same way. It's the same situation. He called me up on the phone and, basically, why hasn't this been reprinted? And I'm owed money on this. That helped me, from a creator standpoint, know what they were going through, and at the same time, from the business end, have to do right by my company, but also have to do right by them. And it ended up working well, and it was all right. But the next job I took was with Todd McFarlane Productions, and VP of Image Comics.
Forgive me, do you work with Todd McFarlane on a one-to-one basis?
Yes,
or? Okay.
Yes, for 2000 to...
I don't know how big the Productions is. I mean,
from 93 to 2000, yeah. At McFarlane Toys, and we ran across, not the same thing, but Todd had hired Alan Moore, Dave Sim, and Neil Gaiman to write 3 issues of Miracle Man. I mean, not Miracle Man, I'm sorry, of Spawn, Angela, things like that. Well, no contract was made. And at the time I was going, Todd, we got to have a contract. And he's going, no. Those contracts come back to bite you on the ass. And I said, no, we really need a contract. I sent him a memo. He and I are real close. We're good buddies. And my memos are very informal to him, because it was just like, you and your friend talking. And I didn't know that one memo would come back to not haunt me, but in a big way. Neil ended up, as everybody well knows, took him to court on all that kind of stuff, all because there wasn't a contract. If we'd had a work for hire contract, that wouldn't have happened. And I ran into Neil at San Diego again. Beau, how are you doing? Nice to talk. I want to talk to you about Todd for a moment. I know it's not your fault. It was almost the same. He goes, he doesn't owe me money. He's paid me quite well, and we had to go through that whole thing. So that went through a big court thing. And I was under deposition as well as a lot of other people that were close in on that. And in the trial, they had my memo blown up to gigantic proportions so everyone could see. And pardon my language, just for a second on this. It basically said, Todd, I said, we've got to have a contract with Neil on this. If not, he's going to be like an ex-wife or ex-husband. He's going to come back and bite us on the butt with this. We really need it. And, blah, blah, blah. And then I just signed it. Yours forever till you blank me over. Just as a ha-ha joke between friends. Well, that's in this court. It's on the news, everywhere. And I'm just going, oh, which is a good lesson that I learned. If you put it in paper, make sure there's a reason why everything is civil and nice. You may be buddies, but you can't, you just can't say that stuff. But I'm sorry to get off topic, but the diversity was a huge thing. And that's just now, in the last few years, is getting, I think, solved. And hopefully it won't be like a union where if you have too little of a union, it's bad. But if you have too much, where I've been on construction jobs, they've shut jobs down because there wasn't ice in the water jug, which is wrong. But if you get that middle road, everything's good. And, in our industry, as we're seeing right now with everything, whether it's political opinions, social justice, injustice, all that is getting, in my opinion, carried away too much. It's too extreme, and we're missing a lot of what's really at hand. So the diversity, if you don't pick a side, then you're against me. And I work for Eclipse Comics, and there were a lot of us that worked for Eclipse Comics, and I lean a bit conservative. Dean and Kat and everybody, they were as close to socialists as you get. Chuck Dixon, all of us, there were a lot of us that were on both sides, or all that. Never ever was a problem at all. All we were concerned about at that time was making good comics, selling them to as many people as possible, but being as progressive as possible with creativity. And we weren't trying to put our political opinions, our religious opinions into these. We just wanted to make compelling stories. And somehow and I say the internet, I blame a little bit of it, that got out of hand. So now you've got creators that aren't getting work because they lean too much this way, or they voted for this person. Both ways, both liberal and conservative, are feeling the effects of it. And it's just made things very divided within an industry that I love.
I've heard that a bit with Chuck Dixon, and I've loved Chuck Dixon. I don't know him personally like you do, but the guy was, just as a DC fanboy, was just a great Batman writer, and his run on Nightwing was the definitive one.
Yes.
I thought that was terrific. And I did notice a few years ago there was a dust-up, and people said, well, Chuck Dixon's conservative. And I think he had, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think he had written an essay, or he had written something where he said, I think my political views have cost me some work.
Yes. Yeah.
I know Bill Willingham is also conservative, who writes Fables, has been very successful because Fables does very well.
Yes.
And I'm afraid, I fear that Chuck has kind of entered an area too where there's probably some ageism as well, where
True.
With comics pros, you get to an age,
You do.
and they're almost looking for an excuse now to deep six you. And so that probably, he was vibrating against that line as well.
We've seen a lot of that, and being on the publishing end, I've been in editorial meetings where editors have said, and I won't even mention names, but they're names that you'd be shocked by. They go, he was always on time, but we've worked with him before. And that's the only reason. And not even politically, these are guys that are all over the board, but it's just, we've worked with him before. And usually these are creators that met deadlines or were ahead of deadlines, which in periodicals, you're doing monthly books, that's what you want. And I got to say, working with Todd, that was one thing he didn't care, hey, they're on time, that's good. He never let political, ageism, anything like that involve in his decisions, which he had hands-on every day with everything, what he was going to do. And now, and I think it's just that bad habit we've gotten into with the internet of everyone believing they're, going to, it's just.
I've actually seen, not to make you paranoid, but I've seen fan sites.
I am paranoid.
I've seen fan sites where people have run the political donations. You go to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, and you can run the political donations of people who work at the various companies. It's not a private act, it's a public act when you give to a campaign, but then that has been used Even in the comic book world, believe it or not, like Jeanette Kahn, who ran DC for years, gave to Democrats, maybe not surprisingly. Other pros have given to Republicans. And I'll see these message board discussions where they say, well, now that I know that so-and-so is either a Democrat or Republican, I'm never going to read their stuff again. Well, wait a minute. They didn't stick it in their story. I mean,
Yeah.
you went and dug up who they wrote a check to 6 years ago in a Senate
Yeah.
race.
It
I mean, you have the right to look it up, certainly, but I don't know that it's necessarily fair to then
no,
hold it against the person.
no, oh, it's just, it's frustrating because, well, who's getting hurt besides the readers is the creativity of the comic books. I've never put my political leanings, my religious leanings, anything into my stories unless it was not even mine, but unless that character needed to be, okay, I've written a lot of murderers in my life. I'm not a murderer, but I need to think like one to write that character, make them believable. And there needs to be a separation of that. You need to be thinking of the readers and also what you like. What's a compelling story? Is that character gay because you want extra sales and you think social justice is being served? Or do you want that character to be gay because it's an important part of that story of who that character is and how it's going to make others react within that story? That, as an editor or creative director, that's what's going to judge it. Right there is this a compelling character? It's the creativity. I feel like sometimes the creativity is getting choked off and censored in some ways because of that, and that's in a comic book industry, an entertainment industry that I love, that's a shame. That personally is a shame.
Although I have other questions, you people are nice enough to show up. What questions do you have, if any? Yeah, sir.
It's mostly a question about working in the comic industry during the 90s, especially during the decline.
Yes.
Leading up to the late 90s, early 2000s. What was it like back then? Because I heard from various sources it was chaotic depending on where you worked.
It was very chaotic. It was very hurtful also as well because the 80s were such a creative time as far as independence, and Marvel and DC actually benefited from all, Pacific Comics, Eclipse Comics, Kamiko, all that. It made them better publishers at the same time. But the 90s with the collectability market that came in, which was a false bottom bag that soon fell through. We saw it was baseball cards are collectible. Okay, let's make comics collectible. Let's make Beanie Babies, action figures. Everything got its turn in the wheelhouse. But what it did, it messed with our distribution system, and that rippled out even to the publishing. Like I said, there were 26 warehouses, 5 minimum each. We ended up with one distributor out of all that, and that because they were asking every publisher to pick sides. Who are you going to go exclusive with? And we never had that problem before, and it was all because, and again, these are my opinions being on my end. When Heroes World was bought, they were third largest distributor, and they were bought up. That started the whole thing because everyone panicked. Oh, I can't have that. We've got to, save ourselves. So you got to go exclusive with us. No, you got to go exclusive with us. Bottom of line was at that point, Capital was number 2, Diamond was number 1, but Capital still did not have deep enough pockets to really go toe to toe with Diamond at that time. And I got to be, my finger was in the pie. I'll never forget when I was with Image Comics, I was VP of marketing there. Larry Marder and I, after having an owners meeting with all the Image owners, we went to Diamond. We'd already been to Capital, but we went to Diamond. We had to make the decision to go exclusive with Diamond at that point. We just saw where things had to go. And I'll never forget, we went into the meeting. We signed the papers. We're going to do this. And we walked out, and Larry Marder and I had worked at Eclipse Comics together. And I told him, I said, that wasn't it's a good thing what we did for us, for Image Comics as a company, but it's not a good thing for comics as a whole. And we weren't the only ones doing it, everybody else was, but I knew then that was It was a good move for what we had to do, but it wasn't a good move for the industry as a whole. And that's kind of like the girlfriend that you break up with on Christmas Eve. You'll always think about that, and that bothers me to this day. When things are bad with comics, it still kind of bugs me. So it was a one. You saw how one mistake could ripple through the whole industry and change it. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, and people will tell you, oh, well, because of this, but that's, in my opinion, just cutting to the chase and giving it to you pretty quick.
Yes, miss.
More of a answer to your question that you asked me, why do I create the character, whether he be gay or whatever, you want, since I've done both writing and have been the reader, you want that character people can relate to.
Yes.
And that's why we as creators or authors make those characters, because whether they're women, children, whatever, they're like, oh, I like, I can't think of Matt Murdock, Daredevil. I like him. I'm blind, but I like it when my brother reads it because I have a character I can relate to. Or Jessica Jones, I like her. I can relate to her. That's what audience members want. They want people they can relate to.
Very much so. That you put it in the nutshell right there, and I've stressed that many times in the fact that people ask me, Wynona Earp, which I created 20 years ago, and it's doing well today. It's on television. We've got a TV series. The question I get's, so why'd you make her a woman instead of a man? And I told him, I said, my goal on that. So I said I wanted it to be a likable, relatable character. That was my first and foremost thing. I said, we went into the delivery room, it came out a girl. It could have been a boy, it could have been a girl. It came out a girl this time. That gender was honestly never a factor in why I wanted. She was the character, the personality was there first. I wanted to make it somebody I would like to hang around with, somebody I'd like to know, but somebody in a position of conflict and stuff made it interesting. Instead of so many heroes were constipated at this time, where it's just that constantly tensed up. I wanted somebody that it was like watching Die Hard for the first time. Everybody, oh, that's just your run-of-the-mill action. No, but the thing I liked about that, Bruce Willis made that character. He was in all this dire situation. But there was a sense of not careless fun, but likability fun to his character. And I wanted to, make Wynona Earp that sort of thing. And when showrunner Emily Andrus began writing, and creating this for television, that was the only stick point I ever had at the beginning when we were going through contractual things is she's got to be likable. And Emily has done that, in my opinion, in spades. I mean, if anything else, Wynona is a likable character. You watch that, and I'm not promoting the show, but you watch it, you smile, you laugh, you feel sorry for her. Even times, you might shed a tear in a bad thing, but that corners all the likability, because you can be likable in sadness and tragedy as well as you can be, it's a great day, I found a quarter, I can buy 2 comics, that kind of a thing. So, no, you are 100%. Relatability and likability, just massive. That's the key that opens the door, I believe, in writing and artistically. The guy, your artist may not be a writer per se, but he's still got all that creativity. If he can translate that into those characters that he's drawing, I'm working with Chris Evenhuis on Wynona right now, and the best compliment he ever gave me was, Beau, I really enjoy writing the acting between the characters. It shows in the faces of those characters, and I couldn't ask for more. And this is a guy, he's from Norway. We share back these emails that sometimes I understand him, sometimes I don't, because he's using Norwegian sense of humor and this, that, and the other, and I do the same thing, I'm sure, with him. But those 2 factors are just massive. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yes, sir.
This is about the Wynonna Earp show and how it may deal with other creators who are in a similar situation. Alan Moore doesn't particularly like how his characters are portrayed in movies, and I was curious about how you reconcile not working on the show all the time
I got to be honest, I've been extremely fortunate. A lot of people, at the show, since the TV shows come on, go, "Hey, Beau, glad you got what you deserve, man. This is, if I got what I deserved, I'd be in a 6x9 cell." But when I first got the Wynonna Earp manual and the Bible that they had done for the television series, it was far different. There was a lot of stuff that was far different from what I had done. And I read through it, and some of it I was just rolling my eyes, some of it I was going, But then I said, no, I'm going to reread it tomorrow. And each time I reread it, I read it 3-4 times. I got it. And the fact that Wynonna Earp I created 20 years ago, it, in comics, had gotten as far as it could as far as sales and a core audience. Because, I've been on the business end, the creative end. I go to all the shows. I mean, no one can personally push your own project like I can. I have, all those resources. But it had gone as far as it could. I looked at it as I've got to reach a wider audience. And with sensibilities that Emily was bringing in, I said, I've got to be open to those and work with it on that and see where we can go. So contractually, they didn't have to involve me in everyday stuff. But since day one, they've involved me in all the auditions for every actor, and that's over 200 just for Wynonna Earp. I get the dailies. If they film it yesterday, I get the dailies the next morning. They go through all it. When we go and I'm going up to Calgary next week. When we go to these conventions, we get together, Emily and I just talk this instant shorthand of what we want to do. SyFy enters theirs as, we want to bring these characters in from the comic book. We want to take these characters out. They have their input as well. But to get a wider audience, I needed to be willing to let that happen. And I am very thankful that I did because, as I like to put it now, I baked a loaf of bread, but Emily is feeding the world with it. Because I was telling Mike, who works the staff here right before we got up here, Todd will attest to this. Todd's worked with me on one of my most testosterone-filled books ever, which was Beau Duke. And for years, most of my career, if I could give myself a wrestling title, I'd have been the Titan of Testosterone. Well, now with Wynonna Earp, my fan base has changed. At San Diego Con, we had a room twice the size of this easily, and 85 to 90% of it was filled with women. I was amazed. This happened at San Diego. It happened at WonderCon. And when I did a signing at Barnes & Noble in Manhattan, same thing, 85 to 95% women. So I have become the emperor of estrogen now. And it's the weirdest, and you think, I've been in this business 30 years. It hit me by surprise, slack-jawed. I was jaded in the fact that, no, this is just the way it is. This is the way it's supposed to be. Turn things around. And you're talking from when I got into comics, I was basically 32, and now I'm 62, and this can happen at 62 when we're battling ageism, when we're, there's a lot of different, I'm 62, I'm conservative. I have my religious beliefs, which are pretty hardcore. And yet I'm the last guy on the roulette wheel that you expect the ball to go, yeah, we're going to, do this. It's a little surreal sometimes. It really is. But I've been very happy because the changes and the additions is what I like to say. The layers that they've added have been great. So what I've done is they've taken things from the comic book and added layers to that. I've taken things from the television show and added those layers to the comic book. So if you've never read a Wynonna Earp comic book before, but you've only seen the TV show, you buy the comic book, which I've had so many people tell me I'm their first comic book, and I haven't been told I was your first since a long time ago. And that is I wanted to give them something. I didn't want to give them a repeat rerun of what they just they're seeing on TV. I wanted to give them what they're familiar with, but yet something new. Same way with all my hardcore Wynonna fans that have followed for 20 years. I want to give them what they've always been used to, but I want to give them an extra layer as well. So I use some of the stuff for the television. So people go, Wynonna's always been blonde in the comic. Well, now she's 27 years old. I always wrote her, which I believe was an age that didn't get enough, for women, enough credit. I always wrote her at 35 to 40 in her prime. And with her blonde version, we'll put it that way. She's already an established agent in the Black Badge and U.S. Marshals. On the TV show, she's 27. She's a raw, broken rookie that's doing, and her hair's brown. And everybody's going, well, why the brown blonde? I can tell you this without giving anything. You would think something cosmetic like hair would not be a big deal. But in the future, in my timeline, it's going to be a very, very big deal. There's going to be a very big reason why her hair goes from brunette to blonde. I know in the world of The Watchmen, The Dark Knight, that sounds kind of crazy. He talked about hair color. There's going to be a very big reason for that, and it's going to be an emotional reason. So that's all I can say without giving everything away. But it's neat to be able to go with Emily's help and everything. I've been able to go back in time and do Wynona's origin in a really different way. And I love to collaborate, and this has been a collaboration. And this is, when you collaborate with other creative people, the rewards are huge. I've written 2 issues with Tim Rosen, who plays Doc Holliday on the series, and I just finished co-writing 2 issues with Melanie, who plays Scrofano, who plays Wynona Earp. And I was kind of worried. Neither one of them had written a comic book script before, and neither one of them had written a screenplay before. So I was going, yeah, I'm going to hold hands. Tim is a lifelong comic book fan. He came in, had the mechanics, he had some beautiful ideas for things we did in those 2 issues. I was thrilled to death. I would send him my part, and within an hour, he would have his back to me, and that was just heaven. With Melanie, she brought something totally different. She brought Wynona's voice. She brought this wicked sense of humor to where I would almost pee my pants laughing at the lines, the dialogue that she get, and then these touching moments that were based off what I told her to write, but she added these extra layers to it. So collaboration, Chuck Dixon and I, he's one of the other few people I've collaborated with, and when it comes to writing, it was just bang, bang, bang. He and I are what's the cliche, brothers from a different mother, and always a pleasure with him. So it's collaboration has wonderful rewards to it. I talk too much. I'm sorry. I can see where
Well, thank you all for showing up, and a big round of applause for Beau.
Thank you guys for coming. I really seriously appreciate it. And my Evansville crew, thank you for showing up in numbers. Thank
so
you
nice to do
very
this
much.
with
I would really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. Sorry.